Network Services Part 2. In this nugget, we're going to look at how to manage more network services for your Linux machine. Specifically, we'll be looking at SendMail, which is a message transfer agent, and then we'll move on and look at the Apache web server, which handles HTTP requests. We'll start by looking at SendMail and learn some basic configuration settings for it, and then we'll move on and look at the Apache web server. We'll talk about configuring Apache and also how to get Apache to start when your system boots up. Let's get to work. Let's start out this nugget by talking about the main components of an email system. There's basically three main components. The first component is the message transfer agent, the MTA. Examples of message transfer agents are programs like SendMail or Postfix. SendMail is the program that we're going to be talking about in this nugget. We'll talk about how to configure SendMail to do some of the basic things that you might need to do on your system. Then there's the mail user agent. The mail user agent is kind of like your mail program, what you think of as your mail program that's sitting on your desktop. Something like Pine, which is a very streamlined text-based mail user agent, or Evolution, which is very complex and graphical. It's a lot like Outlook Express if you've used that in Microsoft, the Microsoft world. Okay, and then there's the MDA, the mail delivery agent. The mail delivery agent, an example program there is something like ProcMail. So let me just walk you through a simple example. You're sitting at your computer here, and you're sending an email to somebody at this computer over here. What happens in this process? Well, you're sitting on your computer and you're using your mail user agent, to type in the email, and then you hit send. And then what happens to that mail is it first goes out to your mail server. Now, this mail server could be on your machine as well, the same machine you're sitting at. More typically, in a larger installation, the mail server is a separate machine. This mail server gets the email that you want to send, and it determines where to send it. And this is where the message transfer agent takes over. Okay, the message transfer agent, something like SendMail, will take this mail and deliver it to another mail server somewhere else. Okay, now this mail server over here, it could be the exact machine that you're trying to send the email to, or it could be a mail server serving a whole bunch of other machines. All right, well, once this server over here gets the gets the message from this other mail server, then the mail delivery agent kicks in and sends the actual message to the particular machine that you were sending it to from your machine. Okay, so that's how these three components interact. And like I said, the one component that we're going to be concentrating on in this nugget is the SendMail component of this picture. Now, there's two RPMs for SendMail. One is for SendMail itself, and one is for configuring SendMail. All right, so if you're going to do any sort of configuring of the SendMail utility, you're going to need both of these packages installed on your system. The names of these are something like SendMail_version.rpm, and then for this one, it's like SendMail_CF_version.rpm. Okay, so that's how you distinguish which one is the configuration files and which one is the program for SendMail itself. And then there's a few config files that you should be aware of. One of them is etcmail_sendmail.cf, and another one is etc aliases. The locations of these files always vary a little bit. Some Linux distributions don't have a mail subdirectory. The sendmail.cf file will be directly in the etc directory. Okay, and there's some other files that we'll talk about that we need once we get out to the Linux screen, and we'll see that this sendmail.cf configuration file is a very, very complex configuration file, and you really shouldn't be editing that by hand. So what we'll talk about when we go out to the Linux screen is how do we make changes to the configuration file, and what are some of the most basic standard changes that you might want to make to your configuration file. All right, well, let's start just by taking a look at the packages that I was talking about that you need to have on your system. And the ones that you're going to see here are the SendMail followed by the version number, and this is the actual package for the SendMail program. And then there's a SendMail-CF package, which is the package that you need to have installed if you're going to do any configuration of the SendMail program. And you'll see in a minute why you need this extra package in place, and that'll become obvious. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is show you we're in the Etsy directory. Underneath this in the mail directory is where a lot of the SendMail configuration files live and other important files. Now, the most important file in here is the sendmail.cf file. This is the configuration file for the SendMail program. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this file on the screen here. And let me just page down a bunch. This is all just comments at the top. But down here is where we start getting into actual configuration settings for the SendMail program. So here, like the CP period is actually a configuration setting. CO space at space percent space exclamation mark is another SendMail configuration setting. As we go down, you know, the C bracket bracket, that's another setting, all right? So you can see just by looking at this that it's very, very cryptic, all right? We don't, just by looking at something, we don't understand exactly what it means. You know, there's the spacing and the new lines and things like that are all very critical to this SendMail configuration file. So not only is this a cryptic file, it's very complex to understand for you know, us normal humans. Okay, it's not only is it cryptic, it's also really, really long. It's like 1,000 lines long. All right. So if you need to do some sort of configuration for your SendMail program, you do not go in and edit this configuration file by hand, because introducing a wrong space or something like that is going to end up breaking your SendMail program. So instead of going in and hand editing the SendMail configuration file, what we will edit if we need to make changes is the sendmail.mc file, MC standing for macro here. All right. Now this file has much more readable directives and things like that. Let's talk about some of these, you know, these macros, these lines here, what all these different commands in this file mean. So DNL, this kind of a command, is basically a comment. So everything after DNL on a particular line is just ignored by the macro processor. Okay, so you can put DNL at the end of a line like it is right here. You can put it at the beginning of a line, whatever. As soon as you put a DNL, everything after that on the line is basically ignored. Okay, that's just for us humans to read. Then there's things like include directives. So this will include some other file into our configuration file. There's also these define directives. So these are defining particular variables to these values over here. Think of it like an environment variable. We're giving this particular variable a value, and this is how we define that value for that variable with that directive. All right, so those are some of the basic ones. DNL, include, define. There's a few other directives that you might see in here, but they're the basic ones. All right, now let's talk about some of the settings that you might want to make to your SendMail configuration file, some of the most common things that you're going to have to change. So one of the things that you might want to change for your definition of SendMail is this smart host definition. So if you don't have a full-time connection to the internet, you're going to require that SendMail sends your message to your internet service provider's mail server, and then let that mail server actually handle delivery for you. Okay, so you know, the SMTP protocol, the whole simple mail transfer protocol, that really was made with the idea that your host, your mail server, would be online all the time. But if you've got some sort of a dial-up connection or an intermittent DSL connection or something like that, and you're not online all the time, then you should use your ISP's mail server to take care of sending mail out. That way, if you're sending mail to somewhere like Zimbabwe or something, I don't know, where, you know, it might take a few tries to get the mail across there, then, you know, if you just sent it from your mail server while it's on, and then you turned off your mail server, well, when that thing came back, you know, to said it was unsuccessful, and you want to retry this, well, if your mail server's off, then it's gone, right? The message has just gone to limbo. Whereas if you've set it up to be sent from your ISP's mail server, then it will come back there, and then that ISP's mail server has some settings in it saying things like, you know, retry 3 times, you know, every 24 hours, something like that. Okay, so if you want to use that, what you need to do here is we can just take out that DNL. All right, and then that just makes this an active line, and then I would change this smtp.your.provider to the name of your ISP's mail server, and they should provide that to you when you sign up for a service with them. All right, so now I'm just going to leave it as this smt.your.provider just to show you how to go about making this change to your configuration file now. So what we're going to do is we're going to exit out of our editor here and save our changes. So now sendmail.mc has that new change. We've set a smart host in our sendmail file, but it's still not in our sendmail.cf file. So now the question is, how do we get the changes from sendmail.mc over to sendmail.cf? Well, the first thing that you should do is you should always copy sendmail.cf to sendmail.cf.old, or put a date there or something like that. I'll overwrite my old sendmail.cf.old. So now I've made a backup of the sendmail configuration file, just in case when I go to convert this macro over to this configuration file, there's some problem in the macro that botches up the configuration file. I always want something to be able to go back to that was working. All right, so now once I've copied the configuration file over, now what I do is I use the M4 macro processor, and I say sendmail.mc, and then I pipe the output to sendmail.cf. Okay, I do that, and now sendmail.cf is the new configuration file. Now, like we said, sendmail.cf is very cryptic. So, for us to be able to go in and look at that and make sure that our changes were reflected, that might take quite a bit of work. All right, so I'm not going to sort of page through that sendmail configuration file to see if that smart host, some setting was done for the smart host in there. I'll just trust that the M4 program took care of that for me. Now, as with any network service, once you make changes to the configuration file, you're going to have to restart the service so that the configuration file changes are reread, and those changes are now reflected in the running service. So for the sendmail service, the way that I'm going to do that is go into the etc rc.d initd directory, and in there is a program called sendmail, and one of the commands that you can give to the sendmail service is restart. That's going to shut down the service, and then it's going to restart the service, and this takes like about 3 or 4 minutes to restart the sendmail service. While this is restarting, let me just remind you that sendmail is a service that you can start in the Internet Super Server, ZynetD, like we talked about in the last nugget. However, because sendmail takes so long to start up, and you can notice it still hasn't started back up since I hit enter, then it's not such a great candidate to have run through the Internet Super Server. The next thing that we're going to look at is the Apache Web Server. That's another thing that theoretically you can start within the Internet Super Server, but it's not such a great idea to do that because it also takes a long time to start up. And the whole thing with the Internet Super Server is that Internet Super Server is listening out there when a request comes in, like a sendmail request or a HTTPD request for the web server, then the ZynetD will start up the service to satisfy that request. But if starting that service up takes multiple minutes, then that is not such a great candidate to have run through the Internet Super Server, even though theoretically it is possible. Well, now let's move on and talk about the Apache Web Server. First, let's look at the packages that are involved with the Apache Web Server, and those are the HTTPD packages. Okay, so you can see the version of HTTPD that is running on this machine. The other thing is that I want to show you right off the bat is how to stop and start the Apache Web Server. And again, very similar to the way that we start and stop other services. Again, the name here is HTTPD, and if you want to restart this server, you can just give it the restart directive. It'll shut down the HTTP server and then restart the HTTP server. Here you can see that it says could not determine the server is fully qualified qualified domain name, so it's using 127.0.0.1. That's because I'm behind a a router, and I'm using DHCP for my DSL connection, so I don't have a static IP address and a fully qualified domain name for my computer. But if you did, that would be specified in the httpd.conf file that we're going to look at shortly, and that would be used, and then that would be started up. And that's typically the way that you're starting up a web server, right? It doesn't really help to start a web server behind a router on a dynamic address without a fully qualified domain name, because then nobody's going to be able to look at it because they won't know what my IP address is, and I won't have a static domain name for that IP address. Okay, so there's how you deal with the web server, starting it and stopping it and restarting it and so on. Now let's take a look at some configuration files for the Apache web server. Under etc, there's an httpd directory. Under there's a conf directory, and in that conf directory is httpd.conf. So this is the main configuration file for the Apache web server, and what I want to do here is I just want to take a look at this configuration file and show you some of the basic settings and things that are in there. There's a whole lot of directives and things in this configuration file, but overall it's very, very straightforward to deal with it. And if you're doing something very complex, then you need to consult the documentation, but let's just look at some of the most basic settings in that configuration file. Well, here we are in the httpd.conf configuration file, and like we said, this is the main configuration file for Apache. There's a whole bunch of comments in this configuration file, and as well documented as this configuration file is, and as descriptive as the directive names are in this configuration file, reading this configuration file does not replace looking at documentation. If you need to understand how something is working specifically, then look at the documentation to get that information. So let's just page down here and look at some of the most important directives that are in here. You'll see, you'll get a flavor for how things are set up. The similarities between the pro-ftpd.conf configuration file that we looked at in the last nugget and this configuration file, are, the similarities are vast. All right, and that's one of the reasons I like the pro-ftp program, was because it used a very standard, this form for its configuration file that I was very familiar with because I've played around a lot with the Apache configuration files. So the server root is sort of the main location for all the Apache documents. This particular configuration file is under etc httpd. It's in the conf subdirectory of that main directory. So everything is lying underneath here. That's what that directive is saying. As we page down, you'll see all sorts of different directives. Let's talk about these directives here, these start servers, spare servers, min spare servers, max spare servers, that sort of thing. So when Apache starts up, it doesn't just start up like one process or one server waiting for someone to attach onto it. It actually starts up a number of servers. And in this particular setting here, it's starting up 8 servers as an example. Okay, so it starts up 8 servers, and then people, get onto your system, they get some information, they basically attach to one of the servers, they do some, back and forth traffic, and then maybe they disconnect. Okay, so that's kind of the cycle of what's happening, right? But on any website, you're going to get surges of people that want to connect all at once, right? And then for a while, there won't be very many requests, and then there'll be a whole bunch, and so on. So that's why Apache is starting up like the 8 servers at minimum, right? Because it wants to have some number of servers out there so that it can satisfy all the different requests that come in. Now, if people start attaching to your web server to get information, and the number of spare servers falls below 5 in this particular case, then it will start up more servers so that there are at least 5 spare servers available at all times to handle the new set of requests that could come in like in a surge. Okay? Now, say, a bunch of people connect, it starts up more spare servers so that there's at least 5, then more people connect, so it starts up more spare servers, so there's still at least 5, and then say people start disconnecting. Well, then, as people start disconnecting, all those servers are now out there and they're idle. All right. And if that number of spare servers or idle servers is above 20, then Apache will kill off all the ones that are over 20, because it doesn't need more than 20 spare servers at any one time. That's what these directives are saying. So it just depends on what the load is for your particular system as to how you set these particular parameters. For a system that gets like basically no traffic, you can say, start 2 servers. The min spare servers you want around is 1, and the max you can have is like 3 or something, right? For a site with lots of traffic, the min spare servers could be 50, and the max spare servers could be 200. It just depends on how much traffic you get, how many, like the kinds of surges that you get, and that sort of thing as to how you set these parameters. So as we page down farther, you'll see the listen directive. This is telling the server what port it should be listening on. In this case, it's listening on port 80. If I had a static IP address where I was running my web server, then I would specify that static IP address just like they do here in this example. So their static IP address is 12.34.56.78, and then they put a :80 to represent listen to port 80 on that particular IP address. Okay, then there's all these modules in Apache. So this is one of the beauties of Apache, is that the core of Apache is very streamlined and efficient, and then you can add these modules in and compile those on for whatever kind of functionality you need. All right, so this is the basic httpd.conf configuration file that came right out of the RPM package. I haven't messed with it, and these are the modules that are loaded by default. All right. If you need some extra functionality for Apache, take a look out there, on the Apache website for modules that do what you want. You can search by English definitions. You can, if you know of a particular module name, you can search by module name and so on. You can bring that module into Apache and compile it in, and now Apache will have extra functionality. All right, if there's something that you need Apache to do, odds are that somebody has written a module to do that. For instance, if you're getting, like denial of service attacks on your web server, for instance, you can bring in a module that will monitor network traffic. It will limit people's access to your web server based on their IP address. So if some IP address starts making all these requests per second to your web server, and it goes over some threshold that you set, then that guy will just be blocked off and won't be able to get in and make all those requests and bog down your web server. That's just one example of a module that you can compile into Apache. As we go down farther, the server admin is just where email goes when something goes wrong with Apache. Let's see. Oh, the document root. Okay, so there's a document root out here. Oops, I just went down past it. But a document root is where there it is. There's the document root. It's where the web server will be directed when someone logs on. So if I, type in some web server name in a web browser, then you go into a particular document root on that website. So if I, the typical name for like the start page is like index.html or something like that, and that index.html file should reside in this particular case var www/html. All right, because that's the first place that it's going. And then within index.html, there can be links all over, but all those files that are part of the web page should be underneath the document root. Okay, as we go down, what else? There's a couple more things I wanted to show here. All the different things like logging. That's the last thing I wanted to show. So log level is at warning. So the possible values here are like this, and they're just getting more severe as we go up. So debug messages are not important, info messages are a little more important, and so on, up to emergency messages, which are very important. So this is saying log level warn, so everything warning, error, critical, alert, and emergency will all be logged, and the format is listed down here. Okay, now it's a little bit cryptic maybe. It's not so bad. H is the host name, U is the username, R is the request that was made. Was it a GET request? What was going on? What kind of request was made? S is the status, B is the number of bytes, things like that. So that's the kind of stuff that you can get in the log format. And you can place those logs wherever you want them. There's more directives to do that. Okay, so that's the basics of the httpd.conf configuration file. Let's look at a couple more things with Apache before we wrap up. And the last thing I want to talk about with regards to Apache is how to get the Apache web server to start up when the system boots up. And this goes for any service at all. If you want some particular service to start up at boot time, you're going to follow the same rules that I'm going to go through here. Okay, a lot of services like SendMail and things like that are already configured to start up at boot time, and so that's why a lot of times you'll see confusion over how to do it for Apache, because a lot of services you just don't ever need to know how to do it. So let's just talk about how to do it for Apache, and this applies to all the other things as well. So under the etc directory is an rc.d directory. We've already saw that under there is the init.d directory that has the httpd script that we can say start, stop, restart, and so on. Well, there's a bunch of other subdirectories under rc.d as well, namely rc0, rc1, rc2, rc3.d, all these different files. Each of these different directories here represents a different run level of your system. So like RC1 is in standalone mode. RC3 would be like a basic text console. RC5, or run level 5, would correspond to starting up your system with X Windows. Okay, so if you're in like standalone mode, you're not going to want to start up your web server. You've got other problems. Your disk is crashed or something like that. So you don't want to have HTTPD start up from, for run level 1, but run level 3 or 5 or both makes sense depending on your system. Maybe you just start up your web server in console mode. You don't need all the fancy graphical interfaces because it's just acting as a server, so you would start it up in run level 3. Maybe other places you would start it in run level 5, okay? So you just have to make that decision. Let's go down into the rc5.d directory and check out what's there. Now, the files in here either start with K or S. The K files are the kill files, in other words. All these services will be killed when we go into run level 5. Once all the services are killed, then all of these services that start with S will be started in run level 5. Now, let's take a look at, before we look at that, let's also look at these numberings. So the numberings here just represent the order that these services are killed or started respectively. So S05 Kudzu, that will be started before S08 IP tables, which will be started before S09 ISDN, and so on. All right, now let's take a look at one of these files here in detail. So let's just pick one, S17 key table. Okay, so what this is S17 key table is actually a symbolic link, and we can see that by the L in the first column of the permissions table. And it's a symbolic link to /init.d/key table. So this file here is pointing to this script that starts key table up that we could use to start key table up manually. The same will be true for HTTPD. What we're going to do is if we want HTTPD to start automatically in run level 5, then what we're going to do is we're going to create an S entry here for that table. And this is how we do it. We say ln-s to create a symbolic link. Then we give the location that we want it to link to, and in our case it's /init.d/httpd, and then we give the file a name. So now, where should it fall in this whole list of things? That's up for debate. You can look on the internet to see exactly where you want it. I usually put things that I'm adding to this sort of towards the end. I don't want it to be, before anything that's really, really important. And so I'm just going to put it here at like 91. So I'm going to say S91 HTTPD. Okay, so I hit enter there, and now if we do a listing, you'll see there's the new file that I created. If we do a long listing of that file, S91, then you'll see that this is now a symbolic link over to the HTTPD script. Okay, now what happens is because it's in this directory RC5 on a Red Hat system, then what's going to happen is everything in this directory will be gone through and all of these services will be started. That's what the S stands for at the beginning. That's why we don't have to give like a specific start directive for this script. It's implied because the file name starts with an S and it's in this particular directory. So that's how Red Hat manages these things. Other Linux systems manage them similarly for the details. tutorials, look on the Apache website or look at the documentation for your particular website on how to get services started automatically. And like I said before, a lot of services just get started automatically anyway. Like, SendMail is something that just gets started automatically on nearly every system, and so you never really have to worry about that. But when you come across a service like HTTPD that is not necessarily running on every system, then you're going to have to learn how to do this if you want it to start at boot time every time the system comes up. Okay, well, it's time to wrap up our second nugget on network services. In this nugget, we talked about the SendMail program. And the SendMail program, remember, is just one piece of the whole set of components that are required to deliver mail from your machine to somebody else's machine. And SendMail specifically is what handles transferring mail from one server to some other server in the network. All right, so remember that for SendMail, there was the SendMail RPM package, but there was also a special, the configuration RPM package that you needed if you were going to modify the SendMail configuration file. Okay, and also remember that the SendMail configuration file called sendmail.cf is a very, very cryptic file, very tricky to edit by hand, and so you should not edit that file by hand. Remember, you should take the sendmail.mc file and edit that file, and then create a configuration file with the M4 macro processor. So you run M4 on sendmail.mc and then direct the output to sendmail.cf. Always remember to back up your old sendmail configuration file so that you have something that you know works before you create something that might not work because you messed up some directive or there's some typo in there. Then once we got done with SendMail, we started talking about the Apache web server. Remember, Apache is like the most common web server on the internet today. And the layout of Apache is really nice. In the etc directory, there's an HTTP D directory, and then under there are directories like conf, where the httpd.conf configuration file resides. It's a long configuration file, the httpd.conf, but it's very well written, very well documented. So, familiarize yourself with that. Look at some of the settings that are in there. Always consult the documentation if you're looking at some setting that you don't know what it does, so that you get an understanding of exactly what it does. Once we learned about some of the configuration settings for Apache, then we talked about how to get Apache to start at boot time, and the example that I gave said that we were going to start it in like run level 5, so in etc, actually I messed up there, etc rc.d, then rc5.d directory, we put a file in there that was a symlink over to the script that actually starts and stops Apache. So that's how you do this on a Red Hat machine if you want the Apache web server to start every time run level 5 is entered. Well, I hope you found this nugget informative, and thanks again for watching.